very detailed for 5 years, but they sketch out a program of action over a 10-year period of time. And that means whether you're a local politician or a provincial governor or a prime minister, you know the direction of travel for the country. You don't have to make it up every year. It means that China has had a long-term strategy that it carries out from one government to the next, to the next, to the next. And this is what I believe to be the software side of the continental free trade area, a continental scale plan. Well, clearly neither the hardware nor the software exists right now, not in proper shape, though there are many projects, NEPAD and others, trying to identify the priority infrastructure. My view is, for a lot of reasons, it's really going to move. It's time to move forward. It's time for presidents in each of the regions, President Mahama, of course, Prime Minister Abiy of Ethiopia, many of the dynamic presidents around the continent to say, look, we're going to get it together. We're going to support the African Union Commission, not just to be a group of bureaucrats, but to really, on our behalf, come up with a continental plan of action, both for the physical, the hardware side, and the software side, and especially coming up with a strategy and policy that can put Africa on a fast development trajectory. So African unity is not just a slogan, it's not just a nice thing, though it is also that. It's actually critical for economic success. Africa's success will not come 55 separate times. It will come through a unified, coherent, well-designed, properly implemented strategy in which each of the 55 countries will be a beneficiary of a continental-wide policy. Now, what is the substance of fast growth at a continental scale? There, I think it's important to emphasize that there are basically 4 components of a plan. The first is investing in Africa's young people. Africa is a young continent. Roughly half the population is under the age of 20, though it varies by country. And we need the kids to be in school and learning with quality education. We need for the kids to be online so they can tap online information so that education can be more creative, more impactful, more filled with content than you can find, for example, in a rural school with few qualified teachers around. Once kids are online, the world is theirs. You can make a curriculum, you can connect classrooms, you can have learning experiences far richer than is possible in a particular local school that is bereft of connectivity. So my first argument is that the core strategic pillar for Africa, once there is a continental scale strategy, is an education strategy that's going to get all the kids in school, learning, completing at least up to secondary education, with many kids going into higher education. This is the sine qua non of success, investing in knowledge and in skills. And because of the trained workforce, investing in innovation. The second major pillar of rapid growth is the physical infrastructure. Africa needs universal access to an efficient, reliable, sustainable power grid. Electricity is the fuel of the future for just about everything, not only for traditional uses of appliances, but for running our cars, for running public transport, for a lot of industry, that used to be based on burning coal. It will now be based on using electricity as the fuel source. So a Africa-wide power grid with universal access to electricity is a high priority. An Africa-wide digital grid is a very high priority. Everybody should be online. This is almost within reach, even today, with the fiber backbone that Africa has. But with the concerted strategy, you can make sure that there truly is universal digital access. And then, as I said, the transport services, fast rail, one of the great connectors of China and India, needs finally to come to Africa. Highways, efficient port services, and the like. So without dwelling on the specifics, a second big platform of a continental strategy is the physical infrastructure. A third absolutely essential strategy is the digitalization of the economy. The new digital tools, whether it's computation or connectivity or robotics or artificial intelligence, will be a major transformer of every economy, including the African continental economy. And Africa needs to not wait 20 years for this, but to proceed expeditiously to a digital economy with digital government services, digital payments, digital ID, digital governance. A lot of this is happening. But if it happens at a continental scale, it will happen even better and it will happen more robustly. And the fourth area, the fourth pillar, is innovation. We need African scientists and engineers to be innovative, because even when technology is available from China or from the United States, it needs to be adapted to the conditions in Africa. If it's in agronomy, to the climate systems, to the particular food production systems in Africa. If it's in manufacturing, it has to be attuned to the specific manufacturing sectors of the economy. This requires a strong engineering and scientific model. It requires public investments in science and technology. Well, all of this is within reach, and what is absolutely important is that the role models of China and India help to show how. So my view is the four pillars: the human capital, the physical infrastructure, the digital and AI tools, and an innovation ecosystem can deliver the 7 to 10% per year economic growth at a continental scale. Of course, all of that implies an investment budget of government. It implies access to financing. It implies the ability of government to raise revenues to make critical investments. Those revenues could be, in some cases, from taxation. They could be from local capital markets. They could be from newly introduced pension schemes in which workers make contributions for their eventual retirement. They could be from external borrowing. A greatly scaled up AccraAccra Bank and a greatly scaled up African Development Bank would play a major role in this. And one can imagine regional development banks also playing a role. If anyone says in the US or elsewhere, no, the African Development Bank shouldn't expand, let me just say it should expand roughly 10 times in the scale of its operations. Right now, it's lending $5 to $10 billion a year in programs. It should be $50 to $100 billion a year. This is what will put Africa on a fast growth line. Now, you might say, oh, that's all fine and good, Professor Saxon, but where are we going to get the capital for that? And the main point that I would mention is Africa should be borrowing long-term, 20 to 40-year loans, so that you have the chance to have that doubling and doubling and doubling again over every 7 to 10 years. Because then debts that look high today really are not high as a share of the economy 25 to 30 years from now. So I would like aggressive borrowing from abroad, but not in 5-year Euro bonds, but in 30-year loans from the African Development Bank or AccraAccra Bank, or the BRICS Bank, or from the open capital markets, perhaps money raised in China, floated panda bonds in the Hong Kong financial market, and so forth. I believe that such a strategy of financing can be designed. I play with these numbers all the time. The key point is borrowing is just fine if you don't have to pay it back in the short term, but you have 25, 30, even 40 years until the debt is being repaid. Because if you have that period of time, there's lots of economic growth between now and then, if the borrower is well deployed. So to summarize, a unified market, a continental scale market, a continental scale plan, a focus on quality education, physical infrastructure, digitalization, and innovation at the core of that plan, and a financing strategy in which Africa borrows a lot, but doesn't feel like an insolvent country because it's being given time for growth and repayment in the future. Ghana is not insolvent, but Ghana is choking on debt due now. And the right answer is not even less debt. The right answer is, we'll pay in 25 years, thank you. We'll pay interest along the way, but we're not going to repay the principal because we're going to have economic development in the interim. And this, I think, is the right kind of strategy. So, Ambassador Torre, these are just some brief remarks that I hope are helpful. But my bottom line is we should be aiming for Africa-wide growth of 7 to 10% per year based on a strong continental free trade area and on a unified vision and plan at the level of the African Union. Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much, Jeff. I think that that deserves a second round of applause before you will allow us some minutes, I'm sure, to take some questions before we allow you to go to your busy schedule. So the floor is open. Identify yourself as you take the floor. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Just around here, give him the mic while the next one has a mic ready.
I have something very short to say, that there need to be commitment on the part of the leaders and dedication, selflessness. Without that, if we take the loans, they are going to use it to buy houses and other things abroad. And then we come back to square one and say our problem is our leaders. So the first thing I suggested, we have to let them swear by something that will make them accountable. That's all I have to say for now.
How much was that audible? I've not gotten part of what he was saying, but let's take the next question, or you articulated.
I said when we take the loans and all the money, even we don't even need to take loans, frankly. The collections that every Sunday we collect and take to Italy. Every year, you can multiply how many people go to Mecca to run around the stone. And then by the number of, you just do the calculation, then look at how many schools it could build in our zongos. These are sensitive areas, but that is what sociology is about. If we talk about politics, marriage, occupation, all the 5 pillars of society are very sensitive to discuss. And the very sheer fact that we don't want to discuss, we run around it, is why we are still here. Let them swear by deities which are potent.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I couldn't agree more. Please, next. You lady.
Please, my name is Letitia Mensah. And talking about poverty in abundance, I just want to ask this. Personally, I think that is my perception. I think there is something wrong with our educational system and how we go through the educational system from primary to the university. And the mindset is that I will go through all this educational process and get to the university, graduate, and then I don't have any skill, I can't produce anything. I sit in the science lab, learning the theory and everything, just reading and then writing exams. After a few days later, you forget the same questions you wrote about. So I'm thinking that, like, the educational system is having a problem in a sense that we should be able to produce something from the onset. Like, the theory is there, but we should be able to, from the primary school, the JHS, we should be able to produce something ourselves.
About if we have our objectives clearly defined, then we know how to progress in our education system. The last question, yes, you gentleman in red, please.
All right. My name is Samuel Kofi Asare Bequin, and my question goes to the part of the presentation that was talking about the strategies that China has taken and India has also taken to be able to get to the peak of development. So whilst he was doing that presentation, I went online to also check, because we are talking about Africa, we are talking about the growth of Africa. So I went online to also go and check the number of African countries that owe IMF. And then there were 47. And then I also checked the number of countries we have in Africa. That's about 54, 55 countries in Africa. So I was asking myself, okay, so we are talking about the strategies of development, but looking at the way Africa is, I think we should start with the don't you think we should start with the strategies of paying those debts before we move? Because if you don't pay those debts, you can't actually, I don't think you can actually move on.
Thank you very much. I'm indulging one last question on that gentleman on the back, please.
Yes, please. Thank you. My name is Eric Donathan, and I'm here on behalf of POA. That's the Progressive Organization for Women's Advancement, and IDPAP, which is the Institute for the Development of Pan-African Policy. And my question is that, how can we hope to have access to inclusive and equitably distributed domestic African wealth and well-being benefits from African economic resources and opportunities if we don't have a Pan-African policy for mobilizing, organizing, and empowering indigenous African investors, especially youth and women at the micro-entrepreneurial and medium and small-scale business levels?
Thank you very much. I think we're going to go back to Jeff to address some of these issues, but I think the presentation has been very clear. We'll take on with the next speaker some of these questions, but the bottom line is that it has to be ownership of what Africa wants to do to itself. That's the essence of what has been said here. And compared to other continents that has made a difference in a time frame that is doable for Africa. But the agenda has to be a national agenda first. What do we do to advocate for Africans to do the same, knowing that it is not doable to do it in piecemeal approach in small, tiny countries that we have? But Jeff, before you take the floor, I would want to challenge on one thing. You talked of the African Development Bank, and I know a bit about that organization for having worked with them for 15 years before joining the UN also. One question to you is, how much, given the governance of that organization, how much chances do we have for the governance of those structures to allow the African Development Bank to mobilize those resources? That should be a window between the soft and the hard window of the African Development Bank to be able to lend the African countries for 30 years. And Jeff, linked to that, how much could we think of all those countries in the Western world that have benefited from Africa's generous trade terms to also look at the next strategy? How much resources are they ready to put on the table for Africa to end this dependency on aid such that we can treat from equal to equal? India is not dependent on official development assistance. China has become one of the partners giving official development assistance. So those are the two additional questions, but everything you've said here has been extremely helpful. The agenda has to be a national agenda, and the youth that has spoken here should be pushing for Africa to realize that it has to have an agenda, a global agenda, if it is to be relevant in this world. Not to talk of the plan, the national plans, even that some of the countries have had national plans. But what is it to have a national plans? I've worked in this country, in other countries. You have, by chance, a 5-year national development plan, and then the next government come and throw it away, and then you start from start again. So these are some of the issues that we have. Jeff, you have the floor. We have to free you, and your colleague is here to take on some of the other questions. Over to you.
Yeah, the point in the same direction. How do you make a bold plan and then follow it, and how to live up to it? First, I do think it needs to be Pan-African. And then each region will find its place within that broader plan. So this is the first point, that if one out of the 55 makes a plan, but the rest are not making sense, if there isn't a linkage of the physical infrastructure, it's very hard for one country to do it by itself, or even a few. One needs this continental scale. And that's why I really do want some of the key leaders, it doesn't have to be all 55, but some of the key leaders to say, okay, we get it. We're not going to go far if we do not do this together. We empower a common framework of action, a common list of big infrastructure, a common target, a common economic and monetary integration, and so forth. Of course, that takes time. China did not achieve everything in 1 year. It achieved it over a 40-year period, but there was rapid progress at every step of the way. So this is a first point. Second, think of China's famous plan 10 years ago called Made in China 2025. It identified strategic sectors, and the Chinese government said in 10 years, we want to be leaders in these sectors. And they did a great job. And so that's a role model specifically for industrial policy. There are many areas where Africa can achieve manufacturing and industrial advances. We know that in not only obviously all of the supply chains that depend on African minerals. Africa can be a leader in the battery supply chain, in the new electric vehicle industry, and in many, many other areas. But that itself requires an industrial policy. So I'd like to see a Made in Africa 2035 strategy adopted, giving clarity also to businesses. This is where we're heading. This is where we're putting investments. This is where the infrastructure is going to develop. You raised a question, Ambassador Torre, about the governance of the African Development Bank. I don't know the inside dealings of the board, but I would never accept the United States or outside so-called part owners of the bank saying, no, slow down, we don't accept the capital increase. I would have the African members say, we're moving forward. If the others don't want to move forward, doesn't matter. Their shares will be diluted, but they will not stop us from a massive scaling up. Africa has to own the African Development Bank. Let's face it, it has to own its own financial institutions. It needs to own its own central banks, which could become sooner rather than later an African central bank. The reserves should not be in Paris. The reserves of the banks should not be managed abroad. This is obvious. We're at the end of that phase of history. When it comes to the IMF, look, it's true. The IMF loans should be paid down. They're a modest part of the overall financing. And Africa should extricate itself from that organization. The IMF has not helped African economic growth for 40 years. The IMF manages crises, I'm sorry to say, but it doesn't promote long-term growth. It's not bold, it's not creative. I try to help make it creative. Unless the IMF gets behind an African growth rate of 7 to 10% per year as an IMF target too, then forget it. Then it's not a helpful institution. Then it's just another Washington-based institution. But I'm sure that Africa can find partners in India, it can find partners with China, it can find partners with the BRICS countries. It doesn't have to go to all the usual suspects. It should go to the ones that understand what fast economic growth is. By the way, on the question of what should students learn, great question. When I was working in the villages that Ambassador Torre mentioned, the Millennium Village Project near Kumasi, for example, or other places, the villages are a wonderful laboratory for learning. You learn agronomy, you learn climate science, you learn hydrology. You can learn so many things, but the curriculum was designed in London 80 years ago. And so students weren't learning anything about their own local environment. It's crazy. It was a little depressing, actually, because even, being in a rural area is eyes open. It's so fascinating from every point of view. And you can learn so much and so many practical things. And education should also be practical. Students should be designing mini-grids. They should be designing new ways for local infrastructure. They should be designing new online educational tools and so forth as part of their own experiential learning. So I really love the idea of the curriculum from even lower school, lower secondary, upper secondary, being a participatory curriculum that involves the real life of young people and the real problems that they're going to confront and the real solutions so that they learn how to be the leaders of the new technologies and the new solutions. Bottom line, Africa has to extricate itself at this point from the pessimism, the low growth scenarios, the strangleholds, especially that Europe and the United States have had on Africa for a long time. Partner with the fast-growing regions of the world that are doing it, understand it, and understand what Africa could achieve and could leapfrog. I think China, India, the Gulf region, Western Asia, are all fantastic partners. I'm not against my own country if it ever really wanted to help. Or Europe, if it ever really wanted to help, but I don't count on it right now, frankly. And they're obsessed with other things. And so it's time for Africa to take its own leadership, to make its own strategy, to be very bold, to take control of its own monetary and financial institutions, and to find partners around the world that understand that this is the time for a real breakthrough in development.
Once again, thank you, Jeff, and a round of applause to thank him for taking his valuable time. Chief Allen Chirimanting and the entire team here are very thankful. Thank you, Jeff.
Wonderful to see you. Thanks so much.
Thank
Bye-bye,
you.
everybody.
Thank you. Now, we have our own Professor Augustine Kwasi Fosu. A round of applause for the name already. Professor is, as you know, a renowned scholar. He's there, Department of Economics, extraordinary professor, Economic and Management Science, University of Pretoria. I know that he doesn't want us to go through all those things, but I'm just sampling some of the things that he has been doing. Not to embarrass you, Professor. I can see that you're not in agreement, but I should have to do this. Research Associate, University of Oxford, Distinguished Vice Professor, College of Business and Economics, University of Johannesburg, recent past Vice Chancellor Professor, School of Business at Helsinki, Director, University wider Helsinki, Senior Policy Advisor, Chief Economist, Director of Economic and Social Policy at the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa. Listen, the list is long, and I don't want to continue to embarrass the professor. Let us have a big round of applause to get our next presenter to the stage, please.
Thank you, thank you. I was listening to Jeff speak. I've heard him many times. He never disappoints. He has great ideas, grand ideas, and he's very prescriptive. I like that. My only question is, how? How are we supposed to do all these things? The how is not clear. The impression I have, you're talking about paradox in terms of poverty amidst wealth. How do we resolve that paradox? I think his answer would be straightforward. Integrate and do as I tell you, and all be well. The reality is a little bit different from that. I think we must go back and ask the question, how come many African countries have not done well in the past? Unless and until we can resolve that question, it will be difficult to talk about how to move ahead. And let's not forget, we are nations. We are nations. And yes, we can have a continental agreement and so on, but in the final analysis, whether we like it or not, we are nations and must act at the national level. And let's not forget also, yes, we can talk about China and India, and especially China. And I was very, very impressed when I was in China many years ago. I've been there a number of times. But the point, essentially, is that many small countries have also developed. Malaysia, Singapore, and all these other countries, without having this aggregation, integration. So it's also possible for many countries to develop without integration, but integration can help. It can be the icing on the cake, if you will. So let's not forget about history. We have to go back and pose the question, why did African countries perform so poorly? And I'm going to try to give some information about that as my presentation today. Now, I am being given this, and I'm supposed to be there, so I'm going to start. Let's forget about the outline, okay? Right. How many of us believe that Africa is not wealthy? Anyone? We are wealthy, aren't we? Huge natural resources and so on, in trillions and trillions of cities. Well, let's say dollars. That's better, right? But how do we liquefy the wealth? And there's some recent work indicating how to do that, what we call tokenization. But that's not what I want to talk about. We are going to assume that we are wealthy. We had the wealth before. How come we did not transform that wealth into sufficient reduction in poverty? That is the question here. Obviously, there are all kinds of answers. Jeff happens to believe that colonial legacy has a lot to do with it. I'm not going to dispute that. Climate has a lot to do with it. What I want to emphasize here is the role of governance. Governance. That's what I want to do. But before we do that, I know many of you have probably seen these diagrams before. If you have, ignore it. All right? So here we are in red, and we talk economic growth. There's no doubt that Africa has experienced resurgence in economic growth since about the late 1990s. No doubt about it all, as you can tell from here. However, if you translate that to per capita GDP growth, for example, we haven't done so well. So it says something about fertility, something about population growth. So we need to consider these kinds of underlying issues. And especially the last period, look at how the red has been pretty much below the blue, which is the world growth rate. The reason why I want to talk about growth rate is, and I'll tell you a little bit more later, is that you need that to be able to do anything. If you want to reduce poverty, we need growth, right? If you want to have human development, we need growth, and so on. In terms of poverty, unfortunately, and again, you may have seen this before, we're in red, and the poverty rate has been quite high. And as indeed, there has been reduction, some progress since the mid-1990s. But unfortunately, the rest of the world has had a much greater progress than Africa has, as you can tell. Well, same story, but here we're talking about the poverty gap, which refers to the income gap, instead of just counting people, which head count is what I just showed you. So we ask the question, even if we grew a given amount, how do we transform that growth into poverty reduction? Economists will tell you it's elasticity. I don't know how many economists are among us. When I speak to my PhD students, no problem. I mention elasticity, they know what it is. Now, this may be a mixed crowd. Essentially, we're talking the rate at which we transform growth into poverty reduction. It's negative because we're talking poverty reduction. And the least, in terms of magnitude, is what? Africa, unfortunately. So we can grow as fast as other countries can grow, other regions can grow, but then the transformation is lower. And as a result, if you look at the growth resurgence recently, since the late 1990s, even though poverty has fallen, we have not done very well in transforming the growth into poverty reduction. We ask the question, why? Because it turns out that the initial inequality is quite high in many African countries. And whether you like it or not, income is low. Now it's strange. Because we have low income, it makes it more difficult for us to translate our growth into poverty reduction. it has been shown that growth is the main rationale behind poverty reduction. Here, I did the poverty decomposition, and I found that on average, it was growth. Okay? Growth in terms of income can reduce poverty by as much as 5 percentage points, and reducing inequality can reduce it only by 1.3 percentage points. It also turns out that the dominant factor for poverty reduction is growth in terms of other 24 countries. By the way, let me be clear. Most of the countries in the sample actually reduced poverty. Most of them did. 24 out of 30. And in terms of the proportion of countries, of those countries reducing poverty, where growth was dominant was 20 out of 24. Now, I've mentioned a number of countries here where there were kind of exceptions, like Algeria was one, there's also Mauritania. Now, in terms of poverty increasing, you're talking about a relatively small number of countries, but once again, it's a growth story. It was declines in income that led to the poverty increasing in most of these countries. So we have to ask the question, what accounts for growth? It's important. Many years ago, when I arrived in Nairobi, how many of you have heard about the African Economic Research Consortium? The African Economic Research Consortium, AERC. Anyone? It's a great organization, by the way. There was a project called the Growth Project that was interested in finding out what ails growth on the continent. And they strongly believe that policy is important. We can talk about all the other things called legacy, climate, and so on, geography, but strongly believe that policy was important. So we posed the question, what are the factors that diminish growth on the continent? We call these policy syndromes. Policy syndromes. And those were state controls, adverse redistribution, suboptimal intertemporal resource allocation, and state breakdown. All of us know what happened in the 1960s and 70s, if you were alive, of course. Could you just go to a forest bureau and get dollars? You could not those days. So suppose you had a business person who needs a foreign exchange to expand a business. How does a business person obtain the foreign exchange? It wasn't easy at all. If they had a political connection, then they probably could. But how many of us had the political connection? Is that efficiency? Of course not. It didn't help at all. Adverse redistribution. So where are you from in the country? If you are from a region, you get favors, right? If you are not, it doesn't matter how good you are, you don't get those favors, right? Is that efficiency? No. Suboptimal intertemporal location. So we have oil today. We get plenty of money for our oil, like Nigeria did in the 1970s, right? And Ghanaians moved to Nigeria, right, for greener fields. Then what happened? The price of oil fell by the early 1980s, late 1970s, and what happened? Ghana must go. Ghana must go, right? So it went to a boom, right? It came all the way down. Things were pretty bad economically. So if they had instead smoothed out those funds, things would not have been as bad. state breakdown. Well, you cannot actually accomplish anything when the state has broken down in terms of civil wars, in terms of extreme political instability, and coup d'etat and so on. Without that political stability, where can you go? Nowhere, unfortunately. So these are what we call the policy syndromes. The question becomes, how can you avoid these policy syndromes? The regime we call syndrome-free regime, which is what we want, and that's political stability with a reasonable market-friendly set of policies. So how can you attain that? That is the question, a key question. If you attain that, excellent. We could have, for example, increased growth historically by about 2 percentage points more, 2 percentage points. And that was actually much larger than the gap that Africa experienced with the rest of the world. Absolutely. Even more than that, even 4 percentage points in terms of the United States. The question becomes, what then is the antidote to the policy syndromes? What can we do to ensure that we have syndrome-free regimes? It turns out that the answer to that question is governance. Governance, governance, governance. Or sometimes you call governance stupid. Now, you've done well in this area since the late 1980s or early 1990s in terms of constraint on the executive. I repeat, constraint on the executive. I remember someone posing a question to Jeff earlier. The politicians to go and buy houses, right? To get the money. They buy themselves all kinds of things, jewelry, they have additional girlfriends and maybe boyfriends. I should be gender neutral here, right? So unless we can control the executive, we cannot be sure with much of anything, whether we are integrated or not. That is really key. It also turns out that what I refer to advanced level democracy is important. Again, you can talk about all the planning that you want, but unless you've achieved a certain amount of advanced level democracy, you're going nowhere. What do I mean by that? I mean a situation where you have competitive electoral situation, especially at the executive level. If that happens, then presumably you'll be able to reach a point where additional democratization will lead to greater growth. But before that, you're in trouble. Okay? So I know that people complain, well, our democracy is not getting as much of anything here and there and so on. In some instances, that's true because those countries have not reached the threshold of advanced level democracy in order to be able to enjoy democracy. So let's push ahead. Things may seem bad, but let's push ahead because the golden age is ahead of us in terms of advanced level democracy. Now, I'll say a word about integration. I know that Professor Jeffrey Sachs has said all we need to know about integration. So I'll keep my message here very simple. By the way, I like AFTA. Indeed, in 2021, we did a whole special issue about AFTA. It was called AFTA and African Trade. I'm saying we, because I happen to be what they call editor-in-chief of the journal called Journal of African Trade. Are you familiar with Journal of African Trade? Journal of African Trade. Are you familiar with that? Afreximbank owns that journal. Afreximbank. And we've had about 12 dozen issues. Please look for the journal. Okay? There's no doubt that AFTA can increase trade for us on the continent. So you ask the question, so what? If you increase trade, so what? Well, we expect the trade to lead to greater growth, right? And therefore, we expect that to have poverty reduction, right? With one problem. The problem essentially is that we may also have increased inequality. So you have countries and so on trading. Those countries that have probably better capital, better means, industrialization, may be able also to dominate the process. Indeed, that seemed to ail the East African community, when at one point it broke apart because Kenya was dominating. So let's keep these issues in mind as we integrate. It's not as simple. It's not as straightforward. So then the question becomes, how can we assure us that that progress in terms of increase in trade can lead to poverty reduction? Again, governance comes in. Complementary factors, indicators in terms of national development, education, bureaucratic quality, these are important. And these are developed at the country level. That's critical. It also turns out that migration is important. Intra-Africa migration should be an important component of integration, not just trade. Because there's evidence that migration from African migration can lead to decrease in unemployment, and especially youth unemployment. So that is important. It can also complement the ability of trade, intra-African trade, to lead to decreased unemployment. That's an important finding. I'm sure you're getting ready for the conclusion, right? Well, the wealth is there. The wealth is yet to be liquefied, right? But even if you liquefy that wealth, it would not be enough to make Africa unpoor. The growth must be transformed. As we found out, the transformation rate is low for Africa. So we must engage in processes that lead to a high transformation rate. And we need to engage in governance strategies so that we have a situation of executive constraint. Executive constraint is critical here. And as we indicated, intra-regional trade is also important, but migration in particular is critical. But I would like to say a little bit more about the critical nature of ESCOMs. Now, it turns out that ESCOMs is an institutional policy instrument, and then you may ask me, why ESCOMs? There's so many measures of governance out there, right? But why ESCOMs? Because you can operationalize ESCOMs. How do you control corruption? How do you bring about government effectiveness? How can you do any of these things? It's easier said than done. My hypothesis here is that ESCOMs may actually be the trick to ensuring that we can get all those governance measures to be interested in. Of course, there are challenges. How do we achieve enough ESCOMs? Well, we can have constitutional amendment, right? But it's not easy, is it? It's not easy at all. So you must think about a solution. What is the optimal level of response? Another point that I've not made in terms of decreasing response, and again, this is at the hypothesis stage. Perhaps we can reduce the power of the central government, right? By having a little bit more decentralization, having localities carry more of the burden. The problem is that there's a tendency for central government to ensure that these localities are not sufficiently independent. But they can only be independent if they had sufficient power in terms of autonomy of revenues in addition to spending. So we need to think about how to bring about increasing ESCONs. And decentralization may be a way out. Well, that is the poverty reduction process, and we must be patient and persevere in the process. So that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor, and thank you for the audience. You've been patient and perseverant, as I could observe you all following the presentation. So we'll open to a few questions and from the floor. Shall we say that we take 3? I'm looking at the organizer. So we'll take 1 from the left, 1 central, and 1 from the right. It's so decided, please.
All right, thank you. My name is Owewi Ebenezer. You spoke about governance issue that has to be adhered to properly in order to eliminate poverty. Part of my work involves community engagement, and I can tell you poverty is real. When you go to typical communities in Ghana, poverty is really real. Now, if it is about governance, then it is important government looks at policies that will reduce the number of loans that we take. Now, the young boy was talking about why don't we rather encourage government to pay loans? When the first professor presented, that why don't we rather encourage them to pay the loans than encouraging them to borrow? You see, the more they borrow, the more poverty we are creating for the future. And I will not go far. In recent times, Ghana, we had our DDE program, where about 850,000 people were pushed into the poverty line. In Uganda, for example, there was an instance where they were about to default in their loans, and there was this issue around that China was trying to take over their airport, which they came and said, no, it is not like that. And so, if it is about governance, are we going to say, or are you going to advocate to government that their policy issues should be in relation to how we can pay our loans and not leaving debt to the young people that are coming after us? Thank you.
Hello. Yes, mine is a contribution in essence. I think the topic is poverty in the midst of abundant wealth. And the presentation from Jeffrey Sachs, and this shows a clear thing, that our mindset compared to the Indians and the Chinese is our mindset is to reduce poverty, whilst the rest of the world, the mindset is to create wealth. If you reduce poverty, you continue to be poor. And that is why Africa is poor amidst the abundant wealth. The moment we change our minds and focus on wealth creation, like China did, over a 40-year period, they lifted 850 million people out of poverty because they created wealth. That is today about 80% of the African population. So I think the discourse should be more on how we create wealth, not to reduce poverty.
Thank you very much. Gentlemen, on the, you've moved, yes, to be more central.
I can.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, Prof. Thank you for your presentation. I'm very interested in your third conclusion on decentralization. Flowing from what you said about improved governance, driving growth. Now, could you explain a bit more how we can implement the decentralization in a way that will drive growth and reduce poverty or create wealth at the national level, and then maybe how we can scale it in a continental way? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, we'll indulge for a second.
The decentralization, we've done that. We have assemblymen and unit committees and all of that. They seldom, rarely go to the communities and tell them what is going on in the assembly. And when we talk about governance and mindset, there are 5 pillars of every society, every old, new, all the 123 traditional societies we use to study sociology. They are family, marriage and family. You have economy, which is what we are discussing. To the youth is jobs, or generally we can call it money. Then the third one is religion. Religion, worship God. The fourth one is governance. That's what we keep coming back to. Government. And the last one is education. Education, incidentally, is on the same continuum, a single continuum with religion. The more you know, the more you have control over ideas, the less religious you are, the less spiritual you are. Now, societies which are more religious are poor. President Kufuor came and did Maslow. Women, you give them 10,000 Ghana cedis. Pastor already has 10% of it. 10,000, 10, this thing is gone. Then the pastor has to show the worth of that. So they go on mountain and then you have to collection. By the time you realize, Europeans, before they developed, they had to get over their dark ages. When they say dark ages, it means the time when they were very religious. It was Christianity, incidentally. And when they got over the dark ages, students of Western civilization here will bear me out. Before they started industrialization, you can't go industrialization. We have built the sugar, the factory. It's there. It's not working because roads. Before 2020, I was a member of NDC Professionals Forum, and I kept hammering roads. People said I was talking too much. I was overemphasizing. Now everybody's talking about without roads, those factories won't work. We built
Thank you.
The Jews this thing.
Thank you.
So the question I want to ask, lastly, what I want to ask is that
if you were the pastor, I will come to your church. You are so convincing. But the last one is there.
If we don't treat religion, it will disrupt it when civil war comes.
Okay, thank
you, sir. The Al-Qaeda people, Boko Haram, will come and spoil it.
Thank you, sir. Last but not least, just 1 minute, because we have to conclude this session.
Yes, sir. Doc, thanks for the beautiful presentation. My question, very quick. You spoke about governance and how it is central and key to our ability to reduce poverty, increase growth, and push the continent forward. The critical question is this: most of the people who are within the poverty line, the age bracket, are the youth. None of us, or the majority of us, don't fall in the bracket of governance, policy, and everything that has to do with poverty reduction. You spoke about consistency. How do you convince this youth, or what's the way forward? What's the action plan for the youth who fall largely outside of this scope? The policy making, the governance, the presidency, the powers. What do you tell them? They are here. We are all here waiting. We are still the majority right now in this room. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. You will have a few minutes to answer some of those questions, and then I have a concluding remark. Over to you.
I'll be brief. These are all excellent comments and commentaries. Why not invest in the poor? We should invest in the poor. Absolutely. But you see, we're not going to invest in the poor until unless we have a governance right. The politicians have to care about the poor. And that actually intersects with the last commentary. If they don't care about the poor are not going to be eliminated. What I mean is poverty is not going to be eliminated. Right. So it comes down to governance, and governance, I'm afraid. Mindset, wealth creation, as opposed to focusing on poverty reduction. Well, if we create the wealth, presumably we will reduce poverty if we have the appropriate distribution. Wealth creation is not enough. There's wealth creation all over the world, but amidst that wealth creation is the lack of interest, of the interest of the poor. And you will continue to have poverty. So yes, mindset in terms of wealth creation, yes, but we must also be concerned in terms of mindset about reducing poverty. The final one is decentralization.
Prof, if you could just maybe on that one, poverty reduction, or maybe what was meant was alleviation, because alleviating poverty and giving social safety net to the poorest is something that needs to happen while even you are doing wealth creation. Because some of these people are in such a situation that something has to be done in order to get them out of difficult situation. That's different from this whole notion of poverty reduction. Poverty reduction, unless there is redistribution that is properly done, you are not really working on the numbers. Thank you, Prof. If you
Absolutely,
agree.
thank you very much. And decentralization. You see, what goes on in a situation like we have in Ghana is the central government loves to have the locality depend upon it. If you want to win elections, make sure they have people in place in all these localities and that you're spending money there, right? But is that really optimal? No, it is not optimal. Because what happens? Every region wants a university, for example, right? Why not? So you create 16 regions, you must have at least 16 universities. Is that really efficient? No. And why do all these regions want universities? Because they don't have to pay for them. They don't have to pay for them. As long as the central government is paying for them, why not? Do you want a university? Which region will say, no, we don't want a university? So the solution to that problem, in terms, you have to create a local public good. And local public goods have to be paid by the respective localities. Or at least there should be some cost sharing. I think that is a major problem that we have in our system here in Ghana. But there's no free lunch in economics. But localities want free lunches. Of course, it makes sense. So the solution there is to make sure that they have the appropriate revenues to be able to revenue autonomous. And it should be the responsibility of central government to assist these localities to be revenue autonomous, even though they don't like the idea. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Very much. A round of applause for the professor's brilliant presentation. And I hope that nobody is taking from this discussion that Prof has said anything different from the need for stronger Africa, more integrated Africa. But the precondition should be that at the country level, we do what we need to do, because even in the federations, take the US or elsewhere, things have to happen at the local level. Grassroots has to be mobilized. Things have to be done in order to have that integrated Africa well prepared to enter into competition and to be able to have the economies of scales that are needed for us to get that level of growth rate that ultimately will get us out of poverty. I think that was a point that we needed to emphasize here. But thank you very much to the entire group. Applaud to yourself. You've been very nice. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency, Ambassador Dauda Toure. And special thanks also going out to you, Professor Austin Kwesi-Fosu. We appreciate your taking the time to prepare those slides for us. I saw a lot of young people in the auditorium taking pictures of your slides. We will read and study them even after now and continue to hold on to the message that you have shared. We appreciate you greatly. And thank you to all the young people still in the room. A round of applause for yourselves. It's very nice to see that young people are interested in these conversations, that you have stayed and that you are participating. Thank you so much. We're going to go on to our last panel for today. This will be our third panel, and it's our third and final one. We're just about 15 minutes behind time, and we promised that we're going to stay on time, so we will try. Our next panel and parallel session will happen concurrently as we've done with the previous two. So they're happening at the same time. If you want to attend the other parallel session, it's happening in the Stratford room upstairs. We are going to be speaking now about bridging the infrastructure gap. Bridging the infrastructure gap. And I'd like to invite our chair for this final plenary for today. He has 25 years of experience as a global management leader in banking and financial services across various roles in Ghana and several countries in Africa and in the UK. In his role as CEO of the Ghana Infrastructure Investment Fund, he's tasked with driving the fund to achieve its full mandate and potential, attracting the necessary funding and investments required to bridge Ghana's infrastructure investment gap. Ladies and gentlemen, with a very big round of applause, he's here. Please help us appreciate Nana Jomo Bene.
So good evening, and thank you very much. I'm very privileged to be here this evening to participate in this great dialogue that is going on. I think for us, everybody in Africa is united in the fact that we want to work more together, and we want to ensure prosperity for future, our prosperity, a shared common prosperity for our future. And infrastructure development remains a very key to that prosperity journey that we have. For those of us who are in the industry, it's one of those areas which is extremely important because the perception sometimes belies the reality. The infrastructure gap in Africa continues to widen. It's quite significant even as we speak at the moment. But for most people who are interested in infrastructure, even though in other parts of the world, we are seeing renewed interest in infrastructure projects, when it comes to Africa, the perception is that infrastructure in Africa is very risky. And the perception does belie the reality, because the reality is that the default rate for infrastructure projects in Africa is a little about 5%, which is below the rate in Latin America and below the rate in Eastern Europe. And so it shows that there's quite a bit of an opportunity here. The question continues to remain, why can't we attract more interest in people coming to help us to build this infrastructure gap, which opens the door for more business, for poverty alleviation, and for general prosperity for the population. And this evening, we want to spend some time discussing that with my panel members to see how best we can actually come up with some ideas with you, our audience as well. So the first panelist I'm going to invite up here to help us with this discussion is Mohammed Rashid Ismail. So Mohammed is a dynamic business leader and development professional with experience spanning investments, enterprise growth, and strategic advisory across emerging markets. He has been actively engaged in initiatives that promote private sector-led development, innovation, and cross-border collaboration with a particular focus on Africa's evolving economic landscape. Known for his forward-looking perspective and execution-oriented approach, he brings valuable insight into building sustainable businesses and unlocking new opportunities for growth and impact. I'm sure we are in for a very interesting time. So you're very welcome, Mohammed.
Thank you, Chairman.
A round of applause to him.
Thank you. If I prepared. It's on? Okay. No, that's not it. Yes, we shared it with. They don't have it. Okay. If you please give me a few minutes, we're just making sure that we've got the slides up. Okay, perfect. So my name is Mohammed Rashid. I cover business development for a company called DP World. Just to give you a little bit of background, a lot of people don't realize who DP World is. So we're originally the Port Authority of Dubai. So 1972 is when we built Mina Rashid, which was the first modern port in the UAE. 1979, we actually built something called Jebel Ali. Jebel Ali, for those of you who are in the port sector, is probably the 7th largest port complex globally, and one of the only ones that is actually outside of the Far East. It's bigger than Rotterdam. It's bigger than a lot of the European hubs that we're quite familiar with. We've gone through an interesting sort of journey. As I've mentioned, we were originally the Port Authority of Dubai. In 1999, we actually became a regional operator. We moved outside of the UAE for the first time. We moved to Saudi Arabia, and we did an investment within Africa. 2005, we actually acquired 2 large port operators globally. And then in 2018, we decided to rechange our strategy. We don't view ourselves as a port operator, we view ourselves as a supply chain provider. Because at the end of the day, if the port is efficient, but the cargo still takes 2 weeks to get to the customer's warehouse, the customer doesn't care. So we go from end to end. This is our footprint. We are probably one of the largest end-to-end logistics providers in the world. 10% of global trade passes through ports that we operate. We're in 83 countries, over 295 businesses, over 130,000 employees globally, and over $40 billion of CapEx deployed. So we're big, we're global. What does that mean for us in Africa? This is our footprint in Africa. We're in 48 African countries. We have been present and investing in Africa for over 2 decades. We're probably one of the largest infrastructure investors in Africa. To date, we've invested over $3 billion in CapEx and an additional $1 billion in mergers and acquisitions. That's in the last 2 decades. In the next 3 to 5 years, we plan to invest another $3 billion. That shows our commitment to the continent and our focus. Over 30,000 employees, over 1.4 million square meters of warehousing across the continent. We're also that movement from end to end. We reach over 500,000 points of sale across Africa through over 6,000 trucks that we are operating directly ourselves. So I've talked about this. I'm going to talk about a couple of case studies of investments that we've made. So we entered the port of Dakar, Senegal, where we operate the container terminal in 2008. The pictures on the left in each box are what the port looked like when we came in. The pictures on the right are what the port looks like today. Visually, it's quite clear. What's important is actually the impact. So GMPH, which is essentially the productivity, we moved from 10 moves an hour to over 30 moves an hour. Now, to put that into sort of context, the privatization of the Port of Durban, which has just been completed, was aiming to hit 25 moves an hour. Dakar was hitting that back in 2023. 30 moves an hour is a global level of productivity. Vessel waiting time. When we took over, vessels were waiting on average, these are container vessels, 35 hours. There is no waiting time for any container vessel. Truck turnaround time has reduced by almost 90%, despite the number of trucks having increased by 200%. These have all led to massive improvements upon the Senegalese economy. Beyond that, that's what we've done up until now. What we're doing now is there's a project called the Port of Dan, or it used to be called the Port de Future. That's a $1.1 billion first phase project that we are actually working on in Senegal with the government there. Our original concession obligation was to see us, when we hit a certain cargo volume, was to build a new container terminal. Now, Dakar is a peninsula, and the port, like a lot of ports in our countries, is in the city center. The city has grown up around it. Today, there are about 1,500 trucks going to just our container terminal and a similar number of trucks going to other terminals within the port. So we looked at our growth plans. We went to the government and said, Mr. President, we don't think building a new port next to the existing terminal makes sense. It's going to make Dakar unlivable. Let's look at a new location. We chose a new location, which is 50 kilometers away from the current location. Our original concession commitment was around $300 million. As I've said, the first phase investment here is $1.1 billion. We're able, and that basically is because we're having to build an entire new port complex from scratch. That's the roads, that's the offices, that's the port, but also the marine channel. The reason that we're able to do this is our success within State of Senegal, our relationships with multiple Senegalese states, governments having sort of changed. We're now working with our third government in Senegal while we have continued these sort of projects and investments. And it's that commitment and the ability to see the growth. When we took over the port of Dakar, it was doing 250,000 containers a year. Today, it's doing close to 1 million, and that's before the expansion. When we're building the new port, we're not only just building a port, we're building a special economic zone. And that's really important for us in all of our investments across the continent, because at the end of the day, you need to create jobs. As Africans, we do not generate enough cargo. And the shameful thing about the logistics sector is that we do not import a lot of containers, but the number of containers per capita that we produce on the continent is much lower than any other continent. But on top of that, 80% of those containers go out empty. We're shipping air from the continent instead of our products. Rwanda, Kigali. The government in Kigali actually asked us to set up a logistics park in Kigali. Now, a lot of people were asking, why are you, as a port operator, as we were at that time, interested in doing this facility? Taking a container from China to the port of Mombasa, which was the main port for Rwanda, would cost between $500 to $1,000. Taking that same container from Mombasa to Kigali was costing between $4,500 to $5,000. The truckers were just simply not guaranteed a return cargo. There were a lot of inefficiencies in that sort of space. So we built a logistics park in Kigali, and the picture there is President Kagame for the soft launch for it. Now that business is doing quite well. We've been able to bring that cost of the inland transportation down to about $2,500. It's still not where it should be, but it's a huge improvement. And you're starting to see Rwandan coffee, tea, and other commodities hitting the world markets because they're arriving on time, in good condition, and at a price where they're competitive on the global market. But the picture that really surprised us is that picture on the left. So when we set up our facility in Kigali, KFC came out and reached out to us. They were wanting to come into the Rwandese market, and then they said, well, we don't have a cold chain, can you build something for us? We built them a cold chain to allow them to import their products, but then the local farmers came to us and said, actually, we want to start using this for exporting products out. The pictures there are of Scotch bonnets. It's a particular chili pepper. It's imported, it's exported by air from Rwanda to China. They were never able to do this because they didn't have the infrastructure to do that. That market has gone so well that the Rwandese are now buying the peppers from their neighboring countries and exporting it as product of Rwanda. It shows you that there are so many of these opportunities where we have world-class products that the world is just simply not seeing because we don't have the infrastructure there. I'm going to talk a little bit about a port that is quite interesting to me. It's a place called Berbera, Somaliland. I'm not sure how many people in the room know where Somaliland is. The president from Sierra Leone was quite interesting because he actually went there recently to observe the last elections. The country is not recognized. Somalia, as we know, went through a civil war in the late 90s. 1991, the northern region, which was the former British protectorate, decided to pull itself out. Now, imagine you're having to build an infrastructure project. We've put a commitment of over $442 million into Somaliland, of which we've spent over $300 million already on the ground. Now imagine, there are all of the problems of doing infrastructure projects in stable countries, let alone a country that has Somalia in the name and isn't recognized. These are the pictures of the port when we sort of took over. There was no maintenance. The port was originally a Russian military base that then became an American military base and then had no maintenance done until we sort of took over. There were no cranes. There were no systems. The picture of the guy bending down, he's dealing with the cash for the bill of lading for a single, that's the cash for one single bill of lading, 3 containers. All manual processing. This is the port of Berbera today. It's 400 meters, minus 17 meters draft. It is able to superpose Panamax cranes. Talking about that benchmark of the 30 moves an hour, they're doing 30 moves an hour with an entirely local workforce of people who have never left the country. It shows you what people are capable of doing if you give them the right infrastructure and the support to do it. Vessel productivity increased by over 450%, but what does that mean to the local market? What's interesting is that even before we completed that new construction, ocean freight prices, we were able to drive down by $1,500 per box. Now imagine the impact of something like that in an economy. Now that's not just Somaliland. We see this everywhere we sort of operate. We recently took over the Terminal 1 in the port of Dar es Salaam in Tanzania. Within 6 months, we were able to take $1,000 a box off the ocean freight. Tanzania does 1 million containers a year. That's $1 billion that's saved for the Tanzanian economy. So the question, when people sort of ask, why are you interested in ports? We're not only a port operator, but the port is the first element of where people come in. And as Africans, we pay more in terms of our ocean freight than any other economy globally. So that's a little bit of an overview of what we as DP World sort of do.
A big round of applause to Mohammed. Thank you very much. And it is very impressive to see a great example of how governments working with private sector to crowd in some funds from serious investors can transform economies, but more importantly, transform the lives of the people who live in these places. And it's a clear example to show that it's actually very possible, that even in the midst of difficulties, these plans can be put together and actually lead to the successful development in the country. So thank you very much. We'll open the floor now for a few questions, if people have any questions, so that we can start the dialogue going. So lady first, and then there's a gentleman at the back.
Thank you so much for your presentation. My name is Alexandra. So I'm very interested in the trade aspects of your business. I work for an agricultural company, and we were recently faced with some shortages. We produce animal feed, and I was curious to understand why we were importing from Europe if we could import from our sister companies in Uganda and Kenya. And a colleague of mine said, well, to import from those other countries, it's extremely expensive. And it didn't make any sense to me, because if it's within Africa, ideally, it should be cheaper. So I wanted to understand what the logic is and how we can get ourselves out of that situation, because I think it would really, really help to bring us together as a people and to make things less expensive. Thank you.
We'll take a few more and then we can pass it on to Mohammed. I'll come to you next.
Yeah, mine is a quick question. I was a bit disappointed that I didn't see any Ghana success story. I don't know if you have any projects in Ghana or you are planning, you have some in the pipeline, and which areas you are looking at.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for the opportunity once again. I want to ask, your company, do you have a specific farm product that you are focusing on, or is a general thing? Because we are into systemic value chain, and currently we are facing challenges because 90% of our buyers are from Burkina Faso, and currently Burkina Faso, they have these political and economic challenges. So the president have imposed cross-border import. So our farmers have challenge in selling their produce now. Is it any way that you can help us solve this particular problem? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mohammed, would you like to answer these, and then we'll go for the next round of questions.
So starting on your regional trade issue, the issue is that we just don't trade enough amongst ourselves. So it's the same sort of issue where it's cheaper to fly to Europe than it is flying across the continent. The cargo flows aren't there yet. So there isn't just enough volume trading around. It will improve with time. We just don't trade enough with each other. So we're importing everything else from Europe. So it's easy to add in another container of animal feed from London or Europe versus getting something from Uganda. The question you can have is the guy in Uganda has to get it to the coast, then has to come around Africa. The time involved in that process, it will actually be cheaper and faster to get it from Europe. And that can only change when we start exporting more and trading more amongst each other. The market, logistics is one of those markets that responds to demand. It's not an early adapter, but once the trade flows and the patterns are there. But I would throw the question out to you in terms of, do you know who those customers are? Because it's unless you are actively asking the shipping lines to say, I want cargo from here, they'll not think of doing that service.
Just to add to that, is the question around economies of scale has been raised, and there's also the question around tariff harmonization, because sometimes, in addition to the logistics, it's also the multiple tariffs you pay as you cross the borders between ourselves. And it's one of those initiatives that AFTA is trying very much to work with the countries so that we move more towards a tariff harmonization to enable goods to move freely across the borders in Africa. AFTA is working on it, and I think it's one of those key pillars of the things that we're working, but we'll be sure to get the information across to you.
So, my friend, you were talking about sort of Ghana. We actually are here in Ghana. So, for example, we work with the government. The medical stores here for the government of Ghana, we actually operate through one of our companies. We distribute for a number of pharmaceutical companies in Ghana, as well as also FMCG. So you're seeing products from Nivea products to others to in certain markets not far from here, we're actually doing SKDs of TVs, of refrigerators, where we recently opened a plant in Nigeria where we're actually producing for Pepsi, some of the snacks. So we're here in Ghana, we're always looking for additional sort of opportunities, but it's about finding the right opportunity. And then my brother over here, in terms of the border issue, is a challenge everywhere in the continent. And it was one of the questions that we were discussing when we were talking about the organization of this event. What would our advice be to countries inland about how they sort of plan for some of these sort of issues? There's a tendency amongst our countries is that we get complacent and used to sort of relying upon a single corridor. Our advice, and this is what was interesting about what Rwanda was doing with this Kigali logistics platform, it's about you need to have multiple options. You cannot, business can be very good with a particular client, but it's a customer concentration issue. It's unfortunately, it's not something that we can do today because we're not in that sector, but there is an opportunity there. But it's about that diversification. The agricultural products that we're producing on the continent are world class, but it's about getting them out to the markets in good condition and in a timely fashion, similar to the Scotch bonnets. There are a lot of these opportunities that just we haven't even come across yet.
Thank you very much. Let's go to the lady over there for the next round of questions.
Yes, good evening. So my name is Angie. My question is that why can't we also in Africa also start to manufacture our accommodation here? Because exporting from abroad to Africa is very, very expensive at the port. And I believe in Europe exporting from the US to Germany is not that huge, if I'm not wrong. But we're coming to Africa here as a business owner in local business ownership. If you go and buy wholesales, the price will be so high that you yourself even have to have a profit. It will not be able to get. So why I go and buy wholesales and come, and I have to also gain. So if you go and ask them, they will tell you that clearing their post at the airport or at the spot is very, 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 very costly. So why can't we in Africa here start to manufacture our own thing here? And we that want to have exportation, you know that because of the revenue, that is why you have to pay that amount.
As I said, we're actually doing manufacturing in Nigeria, where we're producing certain sort of white goods. Import substitution and export both generate foreign currency. Well, one generates foreign currency, the other saves foreign currency that you would sort of need. There are opportunities there, but also manufacturing on the continent is not for the faint-hearted. We still have a lot of the infrastructure problems that we were talking about. Even if you are manufacturing on the continent, you still have to import all of the products. There are the raw elements that you need to bring in. So the challenges are still there. It's not a silver bullet, but it is an opportunity.
Just to add to that, I think now the environment we find ourselves in Africa is that there is renewed interest from private sector capital to try and do projects because there's a recognition, increasing recognition that real returns can be made. The challenge for us in Africa is to be able to articulate it and be able to demonstrate it. Part of it is what Mohammed mentioned earlier, is scale. And we need to find ways that we collaborate with our neighboring countries so together we can provide significant scale, which makes the projects more feasible and more bankable. And that requires a lot of work among the private sectors of different countries and also collaborating with the governments of different countries as well so that these projects can then be put together. Thankfully, we now have development finance institutions like the AFDB, etc., who are also very interested in regional integration because everybody acknowledges that it is only through regional integration that we can have meaningful investment projects that can get the returns. So the work has started, but the encouragement is that we, as business people in the local countries, should find ways of starting to collaborate across our borders so we can present a united front for some of these initiatives, so that if a manufacturing plant, for example, is set up in Ghana with agreements or with the aspiration, working with some of the neighboring countries to supply there as well, then it's not just an import substitution in one country, it's across a couple of other countries, which now makes the projects more bankable and more feasible. Yes, madam.
Is there a way that we can fast track this through policy, maybe within the region or across the continent, so that it becomes more binding on other African countries to make this a priority? Otherwise, we'll keep shifting the goalposts and moving the timeline, and this will never happen.
No, it's a very good point you raised, and I think that was one of the reasons why AFTA was set up, because it was set up from the discussions that were had from the African Union point of view about ways in which we could accelerate this integration that was sort of coming up. Thankfully, we have the AFTA headquarters based in Ghana, and obviously it is quite difficult at this stage to undo years of policy that have been put in place that were geared towards country-specific. And therefore, how to unravel that and move more towards the integration is where the big challenge is. But I think one of the opportunities we have as business people and as private sector people is to collaborate some more so that it's a stronger voice to try and advocate more strongly. Because I think for more of the advocacy will drive the process much further. So thank you very much. We'll take a couple more questions here, I think, for Mohammed.
Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Tony Luck from the Diaspora Africa Forum. We're the only embassy in the world for the diaspora. We're located at the Du Bois Center. There are two things that are outside of Africa that we have not talked about today at all. One is reparations, all the money that's owed to us, which our president currently is the champion for reparations at the African Union, and the brain drain. African, continental, and historical are building other people's country. We keep asking the wrong question. We're asking the wrong question. We're asking the wrong questions. Our brains are outside of Africa, building the countries that we keep talking about. Our money is also outside. So we have to start finding out why we're in the place we're in, because a lot of these answers that you're giving us, which were great, it was a wonderful presentation. I remember DP World in terms because we were building a port down in Benin and we came to you guys. A lot of what we need is outside. And we have to start thinking about how to bring them inside, because and also, you know, Jeffrey said, I knew him when I was in America, but You know, we can't keep comparing a communist country like China with with a continent with 55 different sorts of democracies that people have made us take, that we're not even so I'm always looking at the 1884 map. What was 1883? Because before they start carving us up in Berlin, we were thriving. So we have some basic foundational things I think we skip over to try to solve these questions. I just want to put that on the table for us to think about. Our brains are outside building other people's countries with our money, and we need to think about that. And we need to consider that Africa was doing something before 1884, and maybe we need to look at that map again. So thank you.
Thank you very much, man. I think these are very, very relevant points to aid in the discussion. What I would like to do at this moment, if you don't mind, is to invite other panelists to join the discussion at this stage, so that we can then go back to answering the questions, to give him also an opportunity to be part of this discussion. If you don't mind. So thank you, Mohammed, very much, and we look forward to seeing an even more significant project in Ghana very soon. I would like to, so a round of applause to Mohammed. I would like to invite our next panelist, who is Mr. Charles Boache, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the Ghana Infrastructure Systems Limited. Charles is a seasoned infrastructure executive and Chief Executive Officer of GICSL, where he leads strategic initiatives to develop, finance, and manage critical national infrastructure assets. With extensive experience across public and private partnerships, project finance, and large-scale infrastructure delivery, he has played a key role in strengthening Ghana's infrastructure ecosystem to support economic growth and industrial development. He is recognized for his results-driven leadership and commitment to building resilient, future-ready infrastructure. With a round of applause, ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Mr. Charles Boache.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Yes, so we have this short presentation and then a brief PowerPoint. So, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, if the idea of a United States of Africa is to move from aspiration to reality, then infrastructure is not only a supporting pillar, it is the foundation. I found a couple of schematic layouts on how to connect Africa's infrastructure under transport, energy, ICT, and digital infrastructure and water resources that the African Union prepared. So this is transport, this is energy, this is water resources, this is ICT and digital infrastructure. They are just schematic layouts, and I think they are good. They are the first step forward. And I want to go deep into how this can be done. I know earlier speakers have spoken a lot about what is broken. So I will focus on what we must build and how we must build it. So let me begin with a simple but uncomfortable truth. Africa's infrastructure challenge is not only about money. It's about credit, and it's also about planning. Most of the time, we see that we always talk about the fact that we don't have the money. Where is the dollars? But we realize that most of the issues are always around us. The things we are looking for dollars to purchase, we already own them. We already own the quarries that produce the chippings for building infrastructure. We own the iron ore that makes the steel that we are importing. We own the petroleum and gas, yet we import fuel and all its byproducts.
We own the limestone, clay, and aggregates that make cement. Africa owns almost half of the world's bauxite. In fact, Guinea alone, like it was said this morning, owns almost a quarter of the world's bauxite. Bauxite is used to manufacture aluminum. The profiles that we use for windows, the glazing, most of the structures you see around are made of aluminum. And we just have to heat bauxite in caustic soda solution, and we get the alumina, which then is smelted to aluminum. So the problem is not an issue of resources. It is a conversion. It is a value addition issue. Africa exports raw materials cheaply, then imports value expensively. That is not a financing problem. It is a planning problem. So really, we are going to go a bit deeper. So these are some of the building materials of civilization. So you see the raw materials and then what is used for. I was a team leader of the Ghana Infrastructure Plan. Ghana Infrastructure Plan, it was launched by the president on October 22nd this year, just about 2 months ago. And it was done in 2015, and we intend to have it implemented. It's supposed to be implemented to make us a rich and prosperous nation. So I'll pick a few of the issues. I mean, we know that once Ghana works, obviously, most of the good results can be replicated in the rest of the country. So let's be very clear. Money follows plans, and credit follows credibility, and credibility follows execution. So the first thing that we must do is to add value from the oil, natural gas, iron ore, etc., etc. I'm going to just pick one example. These are some of the building blocks. Railway is always a big issue, but railway is basically the track infrastructure is basically about aggregates, sleepers, and then the lines, which everything of that is obtained in the country. So the steel lines comes from iron ore. And I have this slide that I prepared. I prepared myself. How you can add value to iron ore that then you get various products. So you see that down there is just iron ore. Iron ore is just sold at $2 a ton. Iron ore in the bush, just excavated, put in a truck, and CIF is about $2 per ton. But then, so you take, let's say, 300 metric tons of iron ore. That's how much? $600. 300 times to $600. That is what we get when we sell 300 metric tons of. And by the way, we haven't started exporting iron ore yet, but we export bauxite in this raw form. We export manganese also in this raw form. And they are all about $2 a ton. So we get $600. So we export, and somebody picks up the $600 of 300 metric tons. And then the first stage of value addition is about steel sheets. And then, so this the same quantity, you get 300 metric tons reduces to about 100 metric tons of steel, because about 2/3 of it will be slag and other things. So, but straight away, the value appreciates to $400 a ton. So you make what, 40,000. You see, I just want to explain the value addition in this real form. We hear add value, add value. This is what it means. The next stage, let's say the iron rods that we sell in the market. We all know what iron rod is. A ton is about $800. And so the same 300 metric tons, that translates to about 100 metric tons of steel. A ton is $800. So how much you get? 80,000. And so on and so on. Steel rails is about 350,000. You go on, then the top there, you see cars. the car that we all sat in and drove here, half of that car was made of steel. Half of an average car is made of steel. In fact, some cars are more than half. So if you bought your car for, let's say, $10,000, then the steel component is what, $5,000. So that same 300 metric tons of iron ore that we sell for $600, when we use to manufacture cars, it will make 125 cars at what, 1.3 million, the same quantity. Then let's say bulldozer graders, it's also about that. So how come that we get these raw materials, we ship to the port, we spend money, we pay freight, insurance, cost, shipped overseas, somebody adds value, and the same process is brought down, and we buy. And then what happens? The person makes money. So we sell to the person at $600. The person comes back and sells to us at $1.8 million. Who makes the money? And we think we can't make it. It's all the movement around shipping and insurance. Why can't we do it ourselves and make all the money? So the difference, the number of jobs that can be created from this low state to a high state, we've computed, you can't imagine. So this is just about steel or iron ore. We've done it for hundreds of commodities. You see, so what we did, and by the way, we did it for Ghana Integrated Iron and Steel Development Corporation. It's a new corporation that was set up 2020 by the government with the Steel Master Plan. So we identified the value chain industries. We picked up more than 400 industries that can be obtained from steel, or this value addition process. You see, businesses do not need money. Businesses need the regular and constant supply of raw materials and then off-takers. That's all. Business just the turnover. Who is supplying my raw materials and who is buying my products? So once that is established, plus all the other byproducts, once that is established, we are ready to go. And that is the job that a government agency must do for so many varieties of industries. In fact, this is the reason why we cannot industrialize. Because you want to industrialize and you have to identify all your value chain and supply chain industries and then network them. The networking is very easy with AI. In fact, basic supply chain softwares, they do all these things. So each of these blocks, some of them are worth billions. Billions, you don't see them very much, but they start from the mining and then the design. And then, I mean, to have a good steel plant running is basically a blast furnace and then charge, and you need a whole town. So you can imagine, that's big jobs that runs around, and the food producers and food supplies and water supply, and then that is where jobs are created. That's where jobs are created. So these are some of the steel, completed steel rows. And by the way, steel is used for construction. They are the most widely used construction material apart from concrete. All the skyscrapers that you see around, they are standing because of steel, iron rod. This building is not caving on us because of steel. You see, even most of the chairs you are sitting on, it's possible because of steel. So these are steel sheets rolling around. These are buildings that railway structures that steel can do. The cars, the bicycle, the motorcycles, even the washing machine, the stove that you have at home. About 60% is made of steel. the trucks, the agri equipment, most of these equipment, they're the buses. So basically, and Ghana has enough iron ore that even when we are cruising as a high-income country, we can use it for over 100 years. In fact, that's for primary steel, and then recycled steel, when we develop, we can still cruise as on recycled steel. This is the proportion of material used in an average car. So you can see that about 59% made of iron or steel. Almost 10% is aluminum, plastics, fluids, rubber, glass, copper. The rest is about fuel. So basically, I just want to illustrate. This is just an example of iron ore. Yeah, okay, I mentioned that. So I can mention 100 other products. We've done it for aluminum, done it for cocoa, several. You see, and the good news is that even the waste products of manufacture of steel is a very important raw material. We call it steel slag. Slag is used as a constituent for the manufacture of cement. GASM says, look, if we start producing steel, they will come and buy this slag. These are normally thrown away. In fact, steel smelters just dump them on agricultural lands. So you don't even have agricultural land to farm anymore. So if you want to take these slags, they pay you for taking the slag. So cement producers say that, look, if you can get these slags, the price of cement will come down by about 30%. And this slag is also used to stabilize soil. It's used as a base material for road construction. It's free materials. Slag is also used to make blocks. Beautiful products, very hard, that can use for housing construction. So the question is, once we start adding value, we get so much, and it brings the cost of infrastructure down substantially. So, and I maybe later on we can go too much about this. This is a railway master plan. We've been talking about connectivity. Railway, how do we use bulk materials, or how do we move bulk materials to the port? Railways are the most efficient. And what do we see about railways in Africa? West Africa is very, very bad. Southern Africa is not. They are moving very well. You see, and this is the railway master plan that was done. And railway depends on steel. The railway track infrastructure, locomotives, wagons, they are about 80% steel. You see, so railways depends on steel, and steel also depends on railway. Because to produce 1 million tons of steel, you have to move about 4 million tons of material. You see, so you have to move limestone to produce steel. You need limestone, you need a bit of coal or natural gas, and then you need some petroleum, you need fuel, and they all move together. Of course, the iron ore is assumed to be at the source. But these days, there's a talk that we may have to move the iron ore down. And that means that you need to produce 1 million tons of steel, you need 5 million tons of iron ore. And that means that you need an extensive railway network. So, you see, I'm bringing these in because they have this symbiotic kind of relationship. Railway needs steel, steel needs railway. It's the same with every aspect of development. They are all related. So we have to do a comprehensive plan and then see how to link them up, crediting and balancing industries. It's not money. It's not money. It's not dollars. It's not even cedis. It's credit. Credit system. And that is how we can develop our infrastructure. Railway, still on railway. So you see railway track infrastructure. I'm an engineer. I see these things. So I took a cross section of a typical railway line. It's made of subsoil, that's laterite. Then subgrade, the subgrade may be a more stabilized laterite. Subballast is a more hardened form of crushed rock. And then ballast, and then the slippers, and then the rail. This is basically a cross section of a railway track. What is foreign about that? Yes, you have only the railway track. Otherwise, everything is local. But then the track is what I'm talking about as coming from iron ore, which is steel. So, yet we have our entire railway system broken. So if our railway system is broken, how do we export? How do we trade? How do we industrialize? And that is our problem. It's not difficult to do. It's not difficult to do. We have to plan and then see the linkages and get into action. These are typical materials that you see in the mining sites. It's called overburden, mining rock waste. They are largely thrown away. But they are very important raw materials for construction. You go to Temaport, for example, we're talking about port infrastructure. We spent, I think, how much do we spend on Temaport? Something like 1.something billion. And before you do a port, we do what we call breakwater. You do breakwater to stop the waste of the sea from coming so they can have a still sea. And breakwater is largely about these materials. Yet we had 100% foreign currency contract that almost 70% were local materials. So these are some of the things that when we did the infrastructure plan, we tried to change. The same applies to railway rolling stock. Railway rolling stock, we put all the railway system together, Eastern Railway Line, Central Spine, ECOWAS, Trans-ECOWAS corridor, and realized that these were the rolling stock that we needed. And so they were large enough rolling stock that will require manufacturing them here. You see, so we put all of them together rather than picking them one by one. Okay, let's go and do Eastern Railway Line. So recently we did a Tema Mpakadan Railway, and when they were being tested, there was a crash, and then it stopped for almost a year. Then we were trying to test it again, and then there was a problem. So once a problem occurs, nothing starts. But then when we are manufacturing these rolling stock, we always, once a problem occurs, we just pick one and then we replace. That is how we develop infrastructure. So yeah, the same applies to roads. The same thing. You see, almost everything there is local material that we need. The salt-base, base, bitumen. We have the Temaro refinery that we just need as a furnace to produce bitumen. Yet every single drop of bitumen that has been used on our roads has been imported. We don't produce bitumen. We have never produced bitumen in this country. Yet we are producing oil. You see, and these roads, when they are done, they improve the vehicle, they reduce maintenance, they increase the riding quality, they reduce the cost of maintenance, they improve the rideability, they enhance the quality of the infrastructure around. They actually increase the value of infrastructure. So basically, we can even get more money from locating around the road, because everybody wants to be closer to a road. So and straight away, your property value increases and you make more money out of it. You reduce the cost of importing spare parts. Our roads are in a bad shape, so we are always importing spare parts. So these are what we need to change. Bauxite, the same. Bauxite From bauxite, we get aluminium. And like I said, aluminium is used for so many things. But even the waste product of bauxite to alumina to aluminium, the waste product is this. The waste product, you get what you call red mud or bauxite residue. Bauxite residue is a waste product in any alumina refinery. But in its natural fact, it's a raw material, it's clay. Bauxite residue is clay. And it's used for manufacture of bent brick, beautiful bent bricks that can be used for housing construction. So with industrialization, nothing is thrown away. You never make any losses. You just have to look at these things clearly. Yeah, look at aluminium. Like I said, we've done this for cocoa, for so many products. This one is transport logistics, I think. This one, railway. So we put all this on the Ghana map, and these are all the industries, special economic zones, industrial parks, technological parks, location of most of these materials are all located on this map. Can be implemented and made and create jobs for so many Ghanaians. We run into several, it generates so much money out of it. So basically, it's about linking these infrastructure and industrial plans together. Infrastructure is not a consumption, it's a productive capacity. When we build railways, we lower logistics costs, we power plants, we multiply outputs. When we build ports, we expand markets. When we build digital markets, we collapse distance. Infrastructure creates industries, and industries create income. And when income rise, people buy the goods we produce, people use the railway we build, people power the factories we construct, and people sustain the economy we design. Yeah. Obviously, so I'm using this Ghana example because we know that once Ghana work, once we're able to make it work, we've gone deep into the Ghana case, and we realize that it's not difficult for us to become a rich and prosperous nation. So we decided to create a holding company that will hold businesses, that will support businesses, provide them engineering support, insurance, banking, enterprise development, etc., etc. Those are what we have at the top there, supporting each other in many ways. Because industries are sitting very isolated. So the holding company is supposed to hold them together, and that is what every government must do. We have to link the industry. They are too independent. They go to China, they go to Turkey, and they are just easily blown away. Because elsewhere, every industry has its insurance company supporting, has its engineering facility, has its enterprise development. You have their banks supporting them. So you go there and you are solid. You have a network of producers and suppliers all supporting you, which we don't have. Obviously, a spatial plan is very important because spatial plan obviously helps to locate industries and housing systems very well. And housing especially is a good sector in attracting funds. And that's money. Because most of us will not invest in railway, or will not invest in roads, or not invest in power plants, but we shall invest in homes. Why? Because a home is the largest investment an individual makes in his lifetime. It's a symbol of security, it's a symbol of inheritance. A house is a status symbol. So, and a house comes with a package of services. Once you are investing in a home, that means that it's coming up with all the package, and then we get the funds, and then we then use it to develop other services, just like the real estate companies do. They actually building homes, but then they also use funds to also do the drainage, water, electricity, etc., etc. And so spatial planning is very, very important. How households live together. And once again, this is a typical project that we do, Greater Kumasi Industrial City. Honorable Alan Martin's project we managed to do, it was financed by the World Bank. It's a typical project that really puts we're supposed to have industrial city, a mixed-use residential industrial enclave. And you see on the map, we identify several of them all over the country. And yeah, this is it. What you have there is the Buankra area. And it's not difficult to do once we plan. Look, the fact is that without even planning, these houses are being developed. You go to our neighborhood, you go to our towns and villages. I mean, don't you see people building? They are building. So why can't we let planning go ahead of development? When we plan well, we reduce the cost of infrastructure, we reduce water losses, electricity losses. Firefighting becomes efficient. Waste management collection becomes efficient. And we are planners looking for work, architects, engineers, all looking for work to do. So it is something that can be done. And the fact is that the population is increasing. At the end of this year, we would have added 900,000 people to this population. In 30 years, this population of 32 million will double. The next 30 years, growing at a growth rate of whatever, 2.2, 2.3, 2.5. Anything that grows at 2.5 doubles in 30 years. So it is something that we must get ourselves together. These days, what the Asian countries do is that, so they get the land, they model the infrastructure, do a fiscal model, then they sell. So the city or the town or whatever has to be planned is modeled in a room, and at times they get half of the money that really is pushed into the project. So they get the money up front. You see? So the money is obtained up front. Of course, we need a disciplined society as well. So basically, in conclusion, it's credit that we want, it's not dollars. And we must use what we already own. We must think of credit. Credit does not require dollars. Credit requires productive assets. Africa is going to use its mineral resources as balance sheet strength. And then we are going to use long-term infrastructure bonds backed by future revenues. Pool pension funds for stable long-term investments. No, recently we heard of the pension funds saying that they don't have anything anywhere to invest in Ghana. They want to invest outside. They have 100 billion cedis of money sitting there that we don't know where to invest because we haven't planned it. We don't have bankable projects. So what would we do? We must capitalize on these continental infrastructure banks. We must move from chasing foreign currency to monetizing Africa's value chains. Credit is created when future productivity is credible. And of course, we must build quality infrastructure. You know, infrastructure is an intergenerational resource transfer. That means that the roads, the railway, power plants, and digital system we build today will serve our children and our grandchildren. Therefore, we must build with standards in mind. Engineering matters, durability matters, maintenance matters. Cheap infrastructure is the most expensive mistake a nation can make. If Africa builds world-class infrastructure, the world will come to Africa. So high-quality infrastructure attracts global manufacturing. It attracts logistic hubs, data center, tourism, and it attracts capital. The world does not invest where infrastructure is substandard. It invests where systems work. So let's say for a digital infrastructure, for example, it helps us trade faster. And it's a very powerful, the digital economy, this is where everything is moving. Everything is moving digitally. It helps us to govern faster, educate faster, finance and more efficiently. They will allow Africa to leapfrog, not by skipping steps, but by compressing time. So, ladies and gentlemen, the United States of Africa will not be formed by speeches. It will be formed when power grids are interconnected. A truck crosses 5 borders without stopping. Railways are interoperable. Standards are harmonized. Markets are integrated. Digital systems speak to each other. Infrastructure binds us into one economic space. So Africa does not need to wait to become wealthy before building infrastructure. Africa must build infrastructure in order to become wealthy. We are going to do it. We are going to plan boldly, build strategically, finance intelligently, execute professionally, and maintain religiously. If we do this, credit will be created, incomes will rise, market will deepen, prosperity will spread. Of course, we need a relationship between the state, citizens, and corporate Ghana. So the United States of Africa is not going to be a myth. It is a construction project. And the time to build it is now. Thank you very much.
A round of applause for Mr. Charles Wache. Thank you very much for your very comprehensive presentation. You raised very strong points for us to consider a change of mind, a change of construct in terms of how we approach infrastructure. Instead of the traditional first go and look for money, it's more about what do we have, what do we bring to the table, and we invite others as equal partners to help us. And in this new era of AI, new era of a new world of ICT, our friends from the diaspora as well raised very important points as to how we create these industries domestically so that people find the opportunities here and that future is driven from here, because we do have the talent, which is the essential ingredient. So thank you very much. In order that we don't keep you too long, we'll allow maybe 2 questions for our panelists, and then we can take it from there. Can we have the roaming mics? There's 1 question in front here. So perhaps you can come for this one.
Thank you very much, sir, for the presentation. My issue has been a worrisome, a young man growing up in the Western region, to be precise, the railway area, having a father working in railways, and today you go back to Takwa, you go to Awaso, in Susaidin, Bogoso, and the rail lines are not working. And you can imagine the number of people who have been brought back home without finding meaningful job to do. And all the rail lines are being taken off. And today we find ourselves in a situation, Galamsey is taking over all our rail lines. You go to Takwa, for instance, Kempinski, you don't have a single rail line on that stretch. And so talking about how we're going to be able to make sure we use these raw materials to create rail lines, I believe that the United Africa that we seek to build, if we are able to put in more effort and look at these areas, then we will be able to have more resources for ourselves, create more jobs for our people, and then we'll have a strong, united nation. And previously, I wanted to add this, that the church will have a role to play in making sure that the united Africa we seek to build becomes solid. For instance, when the DRC was plunged in warfare, it took the Catholic Church to mediate. When you go to South Sudan, it took the effort of the Anglican Church. What I'm trying to say is that my brother may not be in agreement with me, but what I'm saying is that for a united Africa, we cannot take away the effort or the input of the church. And we all must come together. You can't say that we want to build a new Africa without the input of the church. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. So I just wanted to say that from my entire observation, I've realized that most of the prescriptions that was given was government centered and policy centered, and there were too many. We already have a lot of policies in the works, especially in Ghana, for instance, concerning almost every single sector. There are always policies that are drafted and passed for us to develop these systems and structures. But then they are not implemented enough, or they are not effectively implemented. And I've realized that there hasn't been the perspective, we don't really have the perspective of the youth or the youth perspective in these kinds of conversations. A lot of the prescriptions were kind of geared towards or speaking towards an audience that comes from, I think, a more privileged background or a more affluent background. Meanwhile, we have a lot of youthful faces in this room that probably have so many ideas that they're trying to, we come to the African Summit and we try to, we want to know how best we can interact with some of the advices we get here, but then they don't really speak to our needs, especially when a lot of these, say, policies are driven towards investing in initiatives that are already scaling and stuff like that. So I wanted to know what initially with the first speaker, they mentioned that he would speak to building sustainable businesses, right? But then I don't know if I missed it, but there wasn't really any perspective that answered that targeted the needs of, for instance, young, innovative startups, especially when it comes to building sustainable, businesses or companies. So my question, I wrote it here, sorry. Who are we presenting to? There are a lot of startups that want to bridge access to infrastructure and technologies, especially in urban communities and even in rural communities. We hardly touched on their needs. And so what advice would you give to such, can you kind of list some advice that you give to such startups that are trying to kind of navigate through these a lot of like these kinds of concepts that you guys have outlined for us to follow, because we just, yeah, that's just.
No, thank you very much for your question. I think, sorry.
Hello, my name is Portia. I'm a lawyer here in Ghana. My question regards the development of areas, the spatial planning. So presently, we have the Land Use and the Spatial Planning Authority in Ghana. I wanted to ask Mr. Ishmael whether he had any other recommendations for the effective and efficient exercise of their mandate in Ghana. Since we already have an authority in charge of that, is there any other recommendations he can give in terms of the effective implementation of their duty for us to get to where we want to get to? Thank you.
So thank you very much. I don't know, Charles, if you want to comment on any of them.
All right, thank you very much. I think the first questioner was about this input from the church. I think which was just a contribution, so that's fine. Then the second one, advice to startups. Obviously, yes, you must learn, and then also you must learn, especially global practices, global best practices, and also see how they can fit into local situations. You must learn all the time, and these days AI has really made things a bit easier, and you people are the AI advocates. So I think once you learn everything that you want to do these days, you can watch a video of it on the internet, and that's how also you used to learn instead of reading so much. Yes, reading is good, and I encourage all of you to read, but also watch the videos as well. So that's what I can say. The last question was on support to Land Use and Spatial Planning Authority. Obviously, yes, you saw a bit of spatial planning in there. That is very important. Spatial planning and human settlement. We must separate agricultural areas from industrial areas, from residential areas. There are some areas, it's not everywhere that we can build or we can live. Some areas have to be used for agricultural purposes. So yes, I'm a strong advocate for spatial planning, and you could see that in the presentation. So LUSPA, yes, we support you, the work you do. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Boashi. I think we spent a good session having these discussions today, and just to conclude very quickly, is to thank all the two panelists for opening our eyes. The issue, though, is that Africa in general is moving from the traditional approach for infrastructure development, where it was very government-centered and government-driven, to a partnership now with private sector and with business. And it requires we ourselves as users to have that change in our construct and in our mind as we approach these things. And the youth play a very critical role in there. But the role played by the youth is more towards advocacy, in finding out what is actually happening and putting ourselves or putting yourselves together as youth to advocate for the right policies to be implemented and to ensure that we build the synergies. As Mr. Boachi has showed us, there are many synergies in some of the industries. It will be good to advocate for these changes that we would like to see. The infrastructure conversation is ongoing, and I think I would like to encourage all of us to fully participate and find the opportunities that are in there. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. A bigger round of applause for them. This has been the panel on bridging the infrastructure gap in Africa. Special thanks to our chair, Nana Jumo Bene, and to our speakers, Charles Boachi and Mohammed Rashid Ismail. Thank you so much. We appreciate you. And for everyone who's still in this room, a round of applause for yourselves. Thank you. Thank you for staying from start to finish. And also special thanks to our brothers and sisters who went for the parallel session upstairs. Special thanks to you too. It's been, if you ask me, a very extraordinary first day here at the African Summit 2025. We've had the conversations that we're hoping we would have, from unpacking the economic paradox to inching towards Africa's green future, and now our conversation on infrastructure in Africa. Tomorrow, we'll have more conversations. Tomorrow's sessions will start early. We'll be here by 9:30 a.m. and we should be wrapping up around 5:30 p.m. The detailed program is still online for those of you who checked. For those of you who have our brochure, all the information is inside. I saw that a lot of you wanted to ask questions also, but we had to limit our questions to 2 or 3 or 4 depending, and that's because we wanted to stick to time. However, if you have any questions that you could not answer, please send it to info@cersdev.org. Let me spell it. CERSDEV.org. If you have any questions, please send it to us and we'll be happy to answer them via email. We'll be happy to answer them via email. A very special thank you to our former president, former head of state who was here with us, our ambassadors who attended, our honorable ministers who are here, our development partners, our civil society representatives, our friends from the media, students who are here, the students who are still here, give me a wave, please. Lovely. I'm very pleased with the attendance and participation of the young people here today. We'll be back tomorrow. I encourage all of you to invite somebody who can contribute to this conversation or who needs to hear this conversation. We're also streaming online, so for those who are unable to attend, you can follow the link on Facebook. We'll provide it tomorrow, just at the start of the summit, and then they can watch from across the world. This is the African Summit. This has been day 1. Tomorrow will be the second and final day. And we say that we're moving from dialogue to action. A special thank you before we go to all the members of the planning committee, and a very special thank you and a big round of applause to the man whose brainchild this is, Honorable Alan Chamating. I beg your pardon, we're starting at 9 a.m. tomorrow, not 9:30. So if you come at 9, you're late. If you come at 8:30, you're on time. If you come at 8, you're early. So see you at 8 a.m. tomorrow for day 2 of this summit. My name is Na Ashoko. I have been your MC moderator for today. See you tomorrow, bright and early. Enjoy the rest of the evening. Good night. All right, I'd like to invite us before we go. We have a cocktail upstairs at the Cedar Garden. It's for everybody. So please join us at the Cedar Garden upstairs for a cocktail and networking session. There's also food, by the way. There's a lot of food. So please join us upstairs. We're going there now. We're proceeding to the Cedar Gardens now for our cocktail session. Thank you.